Hello, everybody. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1234th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Iván Argote and Melanie Kress. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Through his sculptures, installations, films, and interventions, Iván Argote explores our relationships with others, power structures, and belief systems. He develops strategies rooted in tenderness, affection, and humor, creating critical perspectives on dominant historical narratives. His interventions on monuments and large-scale ephemeral and permanent public artworks propose new symbolic and political uses of public space. Argote studied graphic design, photography, and new media at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia in Bogotá and holds an MFA from the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris. And our host today, Melanie Kress, is a curator and writer based in New York City. She is senior curator for Public Art Fund and critic at Yale University School of Art. Previously, Kress held roles as curator of Highline Art until 2023, where she oversaw performance, video, and sculpture exhibitions, as well as educational and engagement initiatives for the program, and co-founder of Project Space Concrete Utopia. She holds a BA in Art History and Visual Arts from Barnard College, Columbia University, and an MA in Contemporary Theory from Goldsmiths, University of London. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Melanie to get us started with a lot of gratitude for Melanie and for Iván.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Thanks to everyone at the Rail for having us today. Hi, everyone. Hi, Iván. It's really exciting to be here in conversation with you. We've had so many opportunities to talk over the years, but not necessarily in this forum. So thank you again, Chloe, for the introduction. We are in conversation today on the occasion of an amazing exhibition that Iván has on view right now at Perrotin Gallery downtown in New York, which is called Breathings and on view until May 31st. Everyone who's here in the city, you have to go see it. Iván has presented numerous recent and prestigious exhibitions and projects around the world, as you heard some from Chloe, many of which we'll also discuss today as context for this exhibition, and is preparing new major shows that he'll share at the end of our talk. And of course, again, for those of us in New York City, Iván, we miss you for when you come back again to visit us. His work, Dinosaur, a 16-foot tall pigeon the size of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, is on view on top of the Highline Plinth Commission through spring of 2026. I was lucky enough, again, for a bit of context, to be invited by Iván to write the text for his current exhibition at Perrotin, and to be in conversation as well with him during the early days of developing his proposal for the Plinth, which I've really been wowed to see come to life with the amazing team there. We are going to speak today through the frame of Iván's selections for this beautiful exhibition, and also share some of the projects that are connected to the larger constellation of his work and thinking that you'll really hear as a through line through a few different chapters that we'll touch on. And with that, Iván, this exhibition covers an almost 20-year span of your work. It links really crucial bodies across time and space and comes on the heels of some really important and highly visible projects. Your contribution to the Venice Biennale and the Giardini in 2024. Next slide. The Highline Plinth Commission, which I just mentioned, will be again on view through 2026. An exhibition called Air de Jeu, the installation for the Centre Pompidou in Paris, part of the Prize Marcel Duchamp exhibition from 2022 to 2023. And as we go to the next image, that's an installation view from this exhibition. I'd love for you to start us at the beginning. Why this show and why now?
Okay, first, well, thanks, Brooke and Ray, for the invitation. I'm so happy to talk with Melanie. Every time we have a lot of fun talking together and have amazing also anecdotes. Yeah, well, let's jump into the subject, right? Well, I think because I was the presence of dinosaur, it's kind of a big presence to me in New York, and I think it's kind of I didn't want I wanted to create a show that gave a context to that to that sculpture. I think I've done different works, but I know many people in New York doesn't know my work or doesn't know my practice like my in the past. Probably some people just entered through my practice to my practice through Dinosaur. So I was actually wanted to give some context and somehow also celebrate with the show the 15 years of collaboration with the gallery. It's a bit of like a celebration show, and at the same time a little bit of like, okay, now I have your attention. I flash you now with the vision. Now just look at my work. And and it's a work that you and we will discuss about it. It talks a lot about like how we use public space, what we see, do we see in public space, what is our relationship with monumentality and history. So I kind of cross different times in my work, and with new pieces such as like this installation called Señores, and then also we'll discuss about other even interventions I did in the city, more like as I used to do when I just arrived to Paris 18 years ago.
Well, and what's really nice about the show as well is you're thinking about each one of these pieces of your work, right? Thinking about monuments, thinking about interventions in public space, and you're pulling in projects that haven't necessarily been a part of those three exhibitions that we just talked about, or aren't necessarily directly connected to the pigeon, but also breadcrumbs of connections to each one of those. So documentation, which also plays an important role in your practice, and then small miniatures, maybe in different sculptures that are connected as well. We talked about, and I wrote about, there are often kind of two gestures that you're making. You're making a gesture of critique, so taking down monuments, cutting them up, but there's always a level of humor and poking fun and tenderness that goes along with them. And the second one is really a generative force of thinking about poetry in your interventions and conversations with the people that make up publicness, as opposed to the built environment or the monuments that make up publicness. I'd wonder if you can talk a little bit about to that balance
Mm.
of critique and criticism and dismantling, and on the other hand, this kind of tenderness that's so often talked about around your work, and how maybe you personally even think about those things as separate or really maybe two
No,
sides of the same coin.
no, I think it's how somehow it's related to the way I was raised. Like I come from a family who has like a strong political background. Both my parents are militants. My father was a very like a leader of the unions of teachers, and so I spent my life in protests and demonstrations, also doing kind of on the weekends visiting different areas in the city. Also, he was elected at the city council for 20 years. Now he just retired. My sister is a congresswoman. So there was a lot of, let's say, they envision and we kind of envision and at family, a life with engagement. It's kind of, we didn't conceive a life without engagement in that way. And then it's like, the only thing you can talk with my family about or like a table is just politics. If not, there's not much, only gossip, but if it's about politics. but but I think it once come from that, and meaning there is always this a critical view on like, okay, where are we, where we are, and like why things are the way they are, and they be different. And then also there is, I think, a way I was raised, and also something I truly believe is like we deserve to be happy or to have joy in our life. So I think you can get both at the same time. You can have a critical and then like serious lecture or like even proposals about like things and transform it, but also having it in mind that we're here for a short time and it's unexplainable why we're here, and this magic has to be somehow celebrated. So I think some of the works, and many of them, are kind of celebratory, and then this joyful kind of critiqueness. I think it's also useful to invite others to these conversations that sometimes are hard. Some of these issues are very hard for some people, and nowadays also when nationalists are more like rising up, and then like extremists also are they get too sensible about these historical issues or these topics. And I think humor, tenderness, affection, it's a way to just try to bring people into a chair, and then let's sit here, talk with me about this. Maybe we can find a way where we meet.
Well, and these three works that we're seeing now from the installation view of the exhibition are almost, three beautiful illustrations or connections to what you're talking
I
about.
test it.
Um, It's so funny to have a live conversation with you because we've talked about so many of these issues, but at the same time, I'm just struck by how amazing this idea is about the magic of living and that you can feel that come through in the gestures. There's always this like, no matter how critical the work is, there is a twinkle and a smile and a wink underneath each one of the gestures. I wonder, because we're looking at these right now, and you were talking about the nationalists dressing up again.
Mhm.
We can focus on the work on the right, which is part of your Touristas series. My understanding is that these began when you went to Spain for the first time. You went to Madrid for the first time, coming from Colombia, and started seeing these statues all around the very famous Central Park in the city. Can you talk about what your experience was going to Spain for the first time, and then how that experience transformed to these dressing up of these
Yeah.
marble statues?
So I moved to Paris in 2006. I made art school and then I started doing kind of my work there. Even 2010, 11, I moved to New York. I lived in different places, including Flux Factory in Long Island City, which was an amazing experience. Um, and then I came back and then like I did my first solo show at the gallery. I integrated the gallery. So I was 26, I was very young, but I didn't realize I was young. I was like, okay, I'm an adult, I guess. And then I got by those days my first solo show, an institutional solo show at a museum named Dos de Mayo in Madrid. So I'm gonna try to be quick on this, but because it was they commissioned my first ever commission piece was this museum. They gave me some money, say like, okay, just you can do a new piece for this show, and they give me this X amount of money. And then this museum, it's in an area that is more like a working class neighborhood, and they always or they build this museum there to connect with like to put a contemporary art museum outside of the center of the city and connect with other kind of publics. So I was like, what better if we use the money to celebrate parties here? So I use all the commission money, and I give it to the bakery next to the museum. There is a bakery, and I give all the money to the bakery. So they bake cakes, and then every day we celebrate a birthday from someone in the neighborhood, or someone from the museum. So babies, like grandpas, surprise parties, everything. So I happened to live like 2 months in Madrid celebrating birthdays every single day. I'm an expert in this. And but because I had a lot of time, I was just walking around the city, and then I have to say I didn't at the beginning. I never had the idea to okay, I want to know Madrid. I had this kind of feeling because of my background. My family are very engaged and anti-colonial, so I was like I didn't necessarily want to go, but now I love Madrid, and I have many friends there. Um, but then I started reading the city and I was like, okay, there is a big of chapter of the history that I haven't been represented in all these monuments, all these facades or parks or cemeteries. There's a big chapter which is like the chapter I can feel myself included. So I said like maybe it would be more honest if we kind of make a more trans or a mutant monument that could change on time and could like maybe be self-critic. So I decided to also, the name of the series is Turista, so also kind of, have the gesture of the European going to South America and wearing a poncho and like having the whole experience and connection with the Andes and all the thing, kind of mocking a little bit of that. So I just bought like a lot of fabrics and I went just early in the morning one day with these fabrics and climb up. These sculptures are very big. They're like 3 times my size, let's say. So you have to climb up and I put the ponchos on 4 of them until the police arrived, and then the police stopped me and said, like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm putting ponchos on the statue. And I was like, why? I said, because it's cold, because it's winter. No, you can see in the images it's winter. So they actually laughed and they said, like, no, really? And then I told the story I just told you, like, because I'm from Colombia, I don't see the history, my history being represented here. And then they were like, yeah, okay, but you have to come down. And then I have many encounters with police, but I always kind of react in the same way. I kind of try to, I count on their intelligence, so I just tell like my conceptual speech. And then I never been in jail though. But that's the kind of the history of that. And it's an important work. I think I did it and I showed it in in Sao Paulo Biennale, and it looked a bit like a joke. It was not yet, monuments were not yet an issue. It's a bit like an outside thing.
Mm. Do you feel like how do you feel like your work has changed then, since this is what, 2012 to 2013 to 2025? These are topics that you were already interested in at that time. How have you watched these works become exhibited or interpreted in different ways?
Mm.
Or have you?
Yeah. Well, I remember in the beginning in the Sao Paulo Biennale, it was a whole different kind of context, I think, in different means and politically and art-wise also. It was 2012. So this it was not really a performance, was not really, it was kind of hard to place as a work, as an intervention. It has some humor, so it was critical and it was humorous. And I remember having the feeling that it was not like uh, as well seen as it is now.
Mhm.
I think because of the events that happened during the pandemic and after the pandemic in the United States, in South America, all kind of the uh, popular either BLM or other things that happen in other countries. The relationship with these monuments became more visible and like maybe tense also, and people realized kind of somehow that there were many of those problematic monuments around. And then so somehow with these works got another relevance and another lecture.
Mm,
So, but it's works that I actually have shown before for 10 years. So
yeah.
it's part of my vocabulary, and also it works that raise get transformed into another new works that we are going to also see. But
Yeah.
I think I mean I'm very happy actually. I'm very happy because they're very now they're very prestigious museums in Guggenheim and LACMA in Pompidou in probably another maybe famous museum in New York. um, and so it's just like I think it's cute because I remember myself just jumping up and putting the poncho on top and like getting stopped by the police, and it's just cute to remember that that's how it starts, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah, and we'll see in a few slides how that's expanded into other video works as well. But first, let's look at the Señores images. These are a series of sculptures that are ceramic. We were looking first at these three kings of Spain that you were adding the ponchos to. And here you're talking instead about an anonymous person. These aren't specific men who've been lauded for anything like their wars that they've won or battles or the countries that they've run. These are a person who is nameless. Can you talk about the switch from that work to this work, or what's important for you about these pieces?
Yeah, so I have the Turista series, which are about either colonial figures in Latin America or in Spain and the United States. Also, I did that in LA. I work about the figure of Christopher Columbus in the Venice Biennale. I work about very specific Gallieni and other kind of statues in different like specific cities. But in some point after that, and this is like a most recent piece, I guess. This is like from a month ago. I wanted to raise a point that is not only about those specific guys, or they're always guys though. But it's about like the way we conceive monumentality, and then the kind of this archetypical way of that is everywhere. It's like over represented. So I also made some research, like quick research, and then for instance in New York 95% of statues represent men, only 5% represent women. And then I used to make the exercise when people visited the show to ask people if they visited like Washington Square, and they said of course. So you noticed there is some plenty of statues and busts there. They say like, yes, I've seen some. Then I asked people to name those, and then known I almost nobody know who those guys are. So I think this guy is this kind of over-present anonymous kind of guy that actually we have also in Colombia, and it's sometimes a conquistador or an ex-president or a military. And then when you dig into the history of those monuments, you realize is most of them are like private people, like commissions or people who, groups of people who raise the money to place the sculpture and make some lobby to place it some in some place. So it's never been about a popular decision or like a democratic decision, like, okay, oh, we want to have this monument because it represents. No, it's just a group of people that on their own, um, either from the, a lot of people from the military, they place this, but I never seen a monument of that celebrates the people who clean our houses or to build our cities or like grandmas, for instance. I would love to see a monument about grandmas. I think they're very important, but I never seen one. And then so is the question is like, why do we have always this guy with a mustache that seems kind of important, but we don't know why. So I make it more like a grandma-ish, and I make these flower pots in ceramics, and then are like kind of piled up and a bit dumped, but at the same time there is this kind of vegetal fountain that is rising out of them, and then out of I like also to imagine when you turn down a statue like this, there is a hollow space inside. And I think is and most I mean it's dark also. There is no light to enter that. So I think by doing this, you let light to enter and then it becomes also a recipient that could hold other things and then change the meaning. And I think it's a good it could be a good future for many of those.
I would like to run through a little bit some of the other projects that you've done, thinking about monumentality that deal with the actual man or that deal with the planters that you're cutting up. This is another image from a recent
Yeah.
show at Periton from a few years ago. If we go to the next slide, here's an image from Venice. Do you want to talk about this work for a second? And then we can
Yeah.
talk about Bruges.
Yeah, so I was invited by Adriano. So I was part of the group show of Adriano Pedrosa, um, and foreigners everywhere. And then he planned to, at the early beginning, so a year before the show, he wanted to create these kind of symbolic pavilions for countries who never had a pavilion in the history of Biennale. So Colombia, for instance, never had a pavilion in the history of the Biennale. So he had this idea to make this like outdoor. So he invites five artists to make five different installations in the Giardini, in these areas that are like in the middle of the pavilions. So he invited me, and then we discussed about what we work, and then I decided also to show this piece. Um, that was actually I was already kind of working on it. I present like a part of it, but then when Adriano invited me, we expanded, and I kind of got kind of all the sense of the word. First, my Colombia literally means land of Columbus. Etymologically, is the land of Columbus. That's Colombia. The meaning of the word Colombia, it's the land of Columbus. Even if Columbus never went to Colombia. And the weird thing is like Colombia got this name after it got liberated from Spain, after the revolution against the Spanish. It was the it used to be called New Grenade. So it's the New Grenadians that while now free from the Spanish kingdom, they said like we should change the name. What should be our name? And they were like, well, let's just name the country after this guy. And then that's why it's called Colombia. And then so one thing is like it has a lot of sense, well, as a symbolic pavilion. And then also for me it was important to kind of bring back this Italian guy to Venice. This is like a sailor, Italian sailor. It's like, okay, we had it for many years now. It's now we are returning it back, and let's let it rest. And that's the name of the piece, Descanso, which means resting or rest. And then my idea was to use the garden as like a tool, as a sculpture tool. And then I plant a lot of migrant plants that you can find in the region, but who actually migrated or were brought to Europe for commerce or for decoration, ornamentation. But are plants you can find easily, but that comes mostly from the Americas. And I also still, I also gleaned plants behind the pavilions all around the Venice Biennale for a month or 2 months. So, and then little by little, the sculpture got eaten, and by July, end of July, September, it was almost complete disappear. I have to cut a little bit because people were like, I don't see it. But they called me from Venice, like, I'm in Venice, I don't see your work. So we cut it just a little bit, but the idea is to have the sculpture getting kind of like a fest somehow, like a feast, like have the sculpture getting eaten by the plants.
Hmm.
And then yes, put this hero to make it lying down, and also rest of the. I think we should like about these monuments, and there's like these heavy ideas of like, oh, displace them or move them, and I think it would be nice to have some days without like a day without monuments or like a year without monuments, just to rest a little bit. We
We
don't
all
need
need the
them to be
rest.
there all the time, every minute, every day.
You said that also about seniors to me at one point. They're just taking a nap. They're really
Yeah,
tired.
yeah,
They
they're
want
really
to take a
tired.
nap.
And
It's
it's a really a lone life. To be a monument, it's really a sad life. Imagine I'm being here for 100 years, looking over you guys, and it's cold and sad and lonely.
can I go take a nap? Can I go see my friends? Yeah.
Yeah, or yeah,
Maybe
resign, should they resign? I think some people should resign. There's like, oh my God, this is too much. I don't want to be a monument anymore.
take it down. Yeah,
Yeah,
let's try
just take me
something else.
down, please. Who's gonna take me down?
Well, and then let's try something else is also what you work on in the most beautiful way. Maybe let's go through, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. Let's look at Bruges quickly, just because it's a wonderful image. Can you give us maybe a quick snippet about this, and then we'll talk about pigeons, and then taking it down?
Yeah, Bruges is so I was invited to the Bruges Triennale, and then Bruges is a very charged city for those who have visited. It's a very beautiful and the Venice of the North, and it's charged with palaces, statues, a lot of monuments everywhere. So I wanted to introduce something that has kind of the same vocabulary. So this kind of 18th kind of century-ish uh, look of statuary, but I wanted to make this kind of like sharp cut and then kind of also ask this question. That's what the piece is called, who, to say is like, is this a monument that was removed or is this something that fell down? It's like it looks like a kind of some like a error in the matrix, I would say, or
A
something like that.
glitch.
Um, a glitch, yeah. But yeah, I think it also and it works super well in the city of Bruges because somehow it dialogues. In Belgium, there is a lot of things about a Belgian king. I forgot his name, Charles. He was a cruel guy. He's the most awful guy in Congo. He tortured and massacred millions of people in Congo. Um, and then I just forgot his name. So there is a lot of issues about specific status because they're everywhere. He was a major character in history. So sometimes it could remind of that without necessarily quoting him. I think it's kind of a step behind the Señores. That is also like an anonymous figure, but you can feel the vibe of the kind of figure could be.
And well, and this is kind of the pointing towards the removal also. You see the emptiness, you see the ghostliness of it no longer being
Yeah.
there. In the next slide, we're going to look at something that feels very, very different. So there's toppling, removal, this kind of additive gesture of adding the ponchos and photographing them and thinking about the anthropomorphizing of that marble figure. And then there is something entirely different. This is a series of sculptures that you worked on for an exhibition at Periton in Paris a few years ago, and connects also to the pigeon that's on the Highline right now.
You know what's so beautiful? You have seen all those shows. You've
Yeah,
been there. It's fine, no? It's nice.
you've you've transformed me into a pigeon fan. How big are these sculptures?
These sculptures are small, and I mean, this. Imagine the pigeon is like a pigeon. It's a pigeon size.
Yeah.
So, and the monuments also the architectures are in bronze. I made them in cardboard, but then we cast them in bronze. So they look kind of astonished, but it's like a special patina we did. It was a time I was living in Rome, and I was very into those uh, Roman like late afternoon scholars. Uh,
So you've been doing this intervening on the full-scale monuments, these sort of toppled monuments that are connected to that scale, and then these really, really tiny images of a pigeon sitting where we would otherwise see, I imagine, the chariot at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Why the pigeons and why this scale?
Um, I think well, I wanted to like I was working already on dinosaur. I was already, I mean, because dinosaur, it was a proposal from 2019, 2020. So it was kind of already in the environment. I also liked this counter movement of doing either something, and then you will see some works who are like monumental and like heavy 12 tone stone, and then counterpart with very tiny and small gestures. I think it's healthy, necessary, and for a work also somehow actually it brings the work also into a uh, I would say it's not cute the word, but it's more into a more like familiar kind of and also they're handmade. They you can see there is somehow rapidness on, there's not much detail, so kind of a very gestural thing of a small thing like a drawing in a way. um
Yeah, it looks like a cartoon, like what you're saying
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
bronze and stone. These
No, I wanted
materials
to
that
be
we
cartoonist. That was I that's why I studied graphic design,
that
because
was your plan?
I started university very young. I was 16. I think it was too young. But so my idea was like, yeah, my dream is to become cartoonist. And I think somehow it makes sense with other works.
Well,
Uh,
but it really does. Like the way that you're playing with these things, we're
yeah,
looking at bronze, we're looking at steel, we're looking at marble, these materials that are used with the intention of saying this is permanent. This is real. This is the
yeah,
history. This is the one thing
yeah,
that we can believe. But when you think about drawing and when you think about cartoons and the image of the pigeon in the previous slide, that looks like clay and cardboard, right?
yeah,
It talks about the facade and the constructed nature of all of these things,
yeah,
even if
yeah.
made in those permanent materials. I
Then
want,
and then
yeah,
I made this sculpture, and you remembered, you also probably saw it. The obelisk bent. That
yeah,
is the obelisk that falls down. That like is the obelisk that kind of lost the strength, and it's very cartoony in a way. It's like beep,
yeah.
this kind of image of power and like like that somehow just lost its strength and then just falls down in a very comic and
Well, and animation is magic, right? Animation
yeah,
doesn't have to follow any of the laws of reality. You can have a cartoon character's eyes fall out of its face, or it can fall off of a cliff and then come back to life a second later. You don't have to follow those rules.
mhm,
But that's also what's amazing. I'm going to jump us ahead and don't worry, we'll talk about Pigeon Fest at the end. But I want to jump us ahead to Levitate, to talk about this
yeah,
kind of expansion from the idea of using the cartoon and using these more malleable and accessible materials to reimagine what reality is and how you can break the rules, to imagine how the rules actually aren't real, or the
mhm,
rules are constructed, or the rules are meant to be changed. This is the first in what became a trilogy of three interventions and then three videos that are called together Levitate, that were also exhibit at the Pompidou in the image that we saw earlier. First in Paris, and then in Madrid, and then in Rome. You staged these interventions with three important historical monuments. We don't necessarily have time to talk about all three of them, which I also would love for us to do. But Paris, and maybe let's stay on, can we go back to the last slide for a second? Can you tell us the story of how this started? And then we'll walk through
yeah.
the slides, and you can give us the whole narrative.
So I have, because this and these touristas and other works about on not this series but also films. I did also films about that and anything. I was part of a show at Centre Pompidou of the collection of the museum, and then I somehow got contacted by a very prestigious intellectual in France named Françoise Vergès, a decolonial militant, but a very also amazing writer of like feminism, ecofeminism. And so she wrote me, is like, okay, I see this in the museum and I really want to talk with you. And so she came to the studio and she was like, okay, there is this statue of this guy in Paris. His name is Joseph Gallieni. There's a subway station on his name. There's a big avenue on his name. I know, I've been into that subway station. Gallieni is a well-known name, but no, I didn't know who was actually Joseph Gallieni and what he did. So, and I think it's the case of maybe 90% of Parisians. Um, So Gallieni was a military man from the late 18th century, from the late 1800s, and he was like ideologue of like how to colonize well a place. And he wrote this book that is called The Policy of Race, and it's basically an instruction manual on how to dominate your colony, how many people you have to kill, how many people you have to force to labor, how to separate people and they don't like race against you. And then they applied this, the French applied these techniques in Tonkin, which is called now Vietnam, in Madagascar, in Haiti, and also in other countries, in other places in Africa. So he was a major like strategist for the French colonial kind of enterprise, and also a very cruel man. It happens to have a monument in Invalides, which is also a very prestigious place in Paris. And the monument, it was actually paid by some military, like the Colonial Maritime, whatever. It's a group of ex-military who actually paid for the monument. And the plinth of the monument is four women of four different races that represent the four continents he dominated, like half naked, that hold him. So to represent like he dominated this continent,
Really
this
kind of one
continents.
of as bad as it gets.
So very like a top of the luxury kind of monument. And then so it's been problematic, and a lot of like feminist group have protested against this monument. Also, some other like anti-colonial or people have protested about it. And then Francois asked me like what to do about this. Like, can you do one of the interventions you kind of do on monuments on this? And I was like, probably not. I mean, it doesn't make much sense because my thing has to do with the relationship between Spain and Colombia. And then so I thought for months, and then I was like, maybe the most interesting is when the city decided to move it out, and then maybe start the conversation by that. Just move it to a place, to a cemetery, or to a museum, and then tell the story differently. At least release, I mean, let these ladies rest for a little bit of this guy and then take him off. But I knew it was not going to happen anytime soon, so I decided just to make it happen myself. So I dressed up as a worker from the city. I rented a crane without any permission and brought it there very early in the morning. I hired two actors on the right who are actually, they look like politicians. We made a casting and we hired these two extras. And then we actually went and I climbed up and I attached the statue.
Can we
So
go to
we
the
made
next
this
slide,
full
Chloe? Sorry.
That's me. And without any permission, also it's in front of it, there is a military museum. So there's a bunch of military there, police station nearby. But they actually police pass by nearby many times. And we did this video. It's 1 minute video when you see the statue getting lifted. In this video, we agree with the newspaper to publish it and then just go back to animation. So I really did all the action. I really went and really make all the setup. I really climbed and attached the statue, and I didn't remove it. I did that on like special effects. But we published this video on as a proper fake news. Also, it was a comment about kind of fake news too, in a very serious newspaper named Regard. And then it went out, it was a bomb in 2 hours. It got like 40,000 retweets, and the politicians start getting pissed, or some actually were celebrating until like in some point the city hall decided to send someone to verify if the statue was stolen or not. And then later that day, they made a tweet saying like, the statue is still here, nobody took it.
Which we can see, I think, on the
and
next slide also.
and then I think, yeah, you see maybe they come some, you can still see that actually on Twitter. And and then actually we used the controversy to publish other articles in different media. I went to the radio, and then it was like it was like a week of kind of this. We hit the media with with this kind of for a week. But that was kind of the whole I think the whole work is there was the whole kind of plan. Is this master plan of like getting this kind of infiltration into the media to talk about this issue, and then like push this kind of uh, forward.
Well, and
Uh,
one thing that we've talked about a lot is how you use the theater of public space. right? The idea that a monument isn't necessarily about the object, it's about that daily experience of the object, right? Even in the way that you talk about, this monument who is tired or who's been there for so long or is cold or is lonely, right? It's what we project on them, and that it's really time-based, right? What's important about them is not necessarily that they exist as physical objects, they exist as images that tell a story day after day. But that what you were able to use is not only like the props. I love the costuming, the idea that the people that you cast for the government officials had clipboards. Something about that is so like spot on. But that you were using the props, you were using the costumes, the high-vis vest, but also the news media as part of that theater, right? Like we talk about the theater of politics all the time, sure, the theater of the news, but how those things connect also with your performance really in public space is really fascinating and amazing. Do you feel like, and maybe if you want to talk about Madrid here or Rome
Yeah,
also,
Madrid came after, and
yeah.
I came back after doing the birthday parties for many in 2012. I came back to Madrid in 2020. Well, I came back many times, but I do another solo show in 2022. And then I was like, okay, yeah, well, let's pick the most sensible issue here. So happens that the national holiday, like the 4th of July, Independence Day, for let's say for the US. So the national holiday in Spain is October 12th. That celebrates the day when Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean, arrived to the Americas. And then when I learned that, I was really surprised. I was like, oh God, I think maybe it could be just flamenco or like the end of, the Franco dictatorship. They have many things to celebrate. End of Civil War. They had a huge civil war. Um, so I was actually, I'm still surprised they actually still have that day as their national main most important holiday because it's from 1492. Um, it's like we're now like we passed through Middle Age, we passed through Renaissance, we came into like modern areas, and they keep still they have that day as celebratory. So I decided to attack or like make something about that, where they actually people celebrate Columbus Day, which is around the statue of Christopher Columbus. Somehow I mean, I don't understand why, but I understand why. It's like all the wealth and most of the wealth of this empire came from that kind of that arrival, right? So I understand why they still celebrate this way. So I imagine, and as I imagine, like, what if we just displace the statue and then we did in Twitter with the Gallieni monument, what if we make it happen on a normal day? And if like I don't know, imagine a guy who is like at his job and then he goes for lunch at lunchtime and then all of the sudden he see the most like important statue of the city just passing on a truck as a merchandise, attached, and then like leave the city. So to create that kind of glitch again in the reality of like normal pedestrians. So instead of doing it in the media, just doing it on the real kind of life. Also, I work with El País because I have a good like equipment like context in that newspaper, and they published an article that was very ambiguous that documented the kind of action, and then that leads to kind of make people believe by the title and some early indications that it probably was like the statue was moved to kind of also kind of make a little stress in the spine to some people. So yeah, it was more like I like it to think as a performance. So it's basically I put this like flatbed to circulate around the city for a day with this statue going in and out, and it really creates a lot of reactions on the pedestrians.
Well, and then in Rome, you were looking at an obelisk that you then facilitated
And
removing. Yeah.
it went bigger. Um,
Uh,
um,
just keeping an eye on time.
yeah,
Maybe we shift to talk about the title of the exhibition, which is Breathings, and is named
breathing.
for your text-based work. For anyone who's interested, there are also images about Rome that we passed by, but this is the kind of tenderness side, and also connects back to the story you told us at the beginning of our conversation. There's critique and removal and performance, but also a kind of address that you're interested in, imagining, these are the objects that have been put up by groups who've had the means and the connections to be able to install these monuments, imagining what the voice of the city is the voice of the people is. And so you connected this to me, to your family growing up. Maybe you can talk about the impetus for some of these works. And we have in the slides also some earlier works that are connected as well. So this image here says, imagine a new place. And there are a number of other beautiful poetic works that say, a space of new hopes, the very romantic one, where our eyes meet, or the warm air between us. There's always an understanding that it's you and someone else, either the person who's speaking, or you and your romantic partner, or you and a stranger that's meeting for the first time, but definitely a sense of extreme intimacy between only just a couple of people, but then writ large, and these very large letters are spread throughout a city.
Yeah, well, I think first, I mean, maybe I'd start by the sentences. I think for me, the sentences are like policy or like or like yeah, like if I had to name laws, I would I would name it this way. I think we should imagine laws about tenderness, about like what could be an economical law that involve tenderness in a way, to have care of the others, take care of the others. So I imagine it's like as a political statements, and at the same time as this kind of sentimental kind of statements you can say to someone you love, or someone to actually, that is actually precisely mention it. And then it's always this idea of yeah, it's like a kind of an intimate kind of language, having someone close, and then I feel we're very close, and then we actually imagine our boundaries. We're just a bunch of people packed in buildings and living next to each other, sleeping on top of each other, and then we just imagine we're so far from each other, but actually we're we're very close, and we share, that's the warm air we share. I forgot the sentence, but it's like we share this air, we share this, we breathe others respirations, people. So I think we focus sometimes a lot into our differences, and then we forgot we can actually many things in common. And then that has a name. I'm reading a book. It's called schemothermy. It's about how cultures have to. Well, I know it's a long story, and then I think text also.
Genesis?
Schismogenesis. Thank you. um, and then I think texts. It's kind of comes, I think, from that political background of mine. I was a kid that was, since I remember I was out in protests yelling out slogans. I was with my family discussing all about slogans. We have to make political campaigns for unions, for city councils, for like the Congress representatives, the party, like my father and his spouse founded. I mean, his spouse, no, but the union, they founded this party at the time. So somehow it's kind of this kind of language of like synthetic kind of language about 2-3 words that kind of represent something, and it was also part of me. And then I was raised as a graphic designer, so I think that's graphic part of the text. And then I think I like posters too. I like somehow has to do with that. And then, oh yeah, I actually forgot we were talking about the posters, and then look at the posters. That was a nice, in 2017, I just introduced it. I did this, has to do a lot of that. Colombia signed a peace deal with the guerrilla we had a war for 65 years, and they finally signed like a peace deal. And then, and it was a very conflictuous perspective on that. Part of the country was against it, part of the country was for it. Some part of the country was more like, let's say, the right wing was like, no, we have to kill them all. And then but it's like, yeah, we've been trying for 65 years and it doesn't work. I mean, we should maybe work on the why this still exists, and not just trying to just erase people from the planet. So finally that happened, and then I make this anonymous campaign. It was not related to any show or any invitation or anything. I just, because I know the political kind of militancy sphere, I paid for 7 months in the 7 major cities a campaign of posters that say "We are tender," and so we spread them all around the city center in different cities, just to see what was the reaction. I had not really expectations, and ended up being Instagram kind of hashtag also with some time. But it says like we are tender, and I wanted to see the reaction of people like, are we tender? And people react like, no, we're not. Yes, we are. People like selfies and people kissing, or people like just complaining about things.
Then this work expanded also on a much larger scale.
Yeah. They discovered me. The discovery was me. So the museum was like, oh, it was you. But a year after the Museum of Modern Art, I told my friends, and then my friends told other friends, and then it was like the museum was like, so oh, it was Ivan who made posters of Somos Tiernos. So they invited to make an intervention. So I make a billboard. It is very central place in Bogota that says Somos Tiernos Eternos. It's like my
And then
I
it expanded to a building.
yeah, true.
Chloe, yes.
I was actually in front of that billboard. And then yeah, and there is this a poem. That's a kind of a small poem I wrote. And then yeah, it was actually a very nice opportunity. It was rare to have, and it was beautiful just to put a subtitle on the city in a way.
Well, again, thinking about scale, maybe what I'll pull us to here, starting with the advertising campaign or a couple of little campaign of these wheat pasted images all around the city that then goes back into the museum realm, but still on the facade of the museum or the front of the museum, into this absolutely massive scale to think about how to say we are tender.
Mm.
For Periton, for the exhibition, you've made some new works that are also interventions in the public realm. And one thing that I'll say, from the texts that I wrote and that we talked about a lot together, one of the things I decided I needed to do was to make different titles for each one of
Yeah.
the sections of the exhibition. And the title for this section was Letters to a Young Country. And, even I imagine from the conception of this work to the installation of it until now, everything that's happening here is changing incredibly rapidly. But it felt like and still feels like a really important moment. And if we can go to that image, Chloe, I would love, Yvonne, if you can talk about,
Yeah.
we've walked through so many different chapters of work over so many periods of time, why you wanted to make something new, and maybe why you made it outside of the gallery, what that intervention was that was necessary.
Mm. I like, it makes me think about the bakery nearby the museum, the where we bought all the birthday cakes. Uh, it was this idea of like also, the world is just right there. It's just next door. I mean, we talk a lot about the world and the real, what thing we experience as individuals, as like um, in different sense. It means political or critical or poetical way. But also there's like that very kind of uh, cold and like noisy street that hits you when you go out. You close the door and then it's always there. And so that's where I actually started my work. I was a kid that grew up in the streets. Not I like I had a home, but I spent most of my time in the street and in a public space and in the streets where actually I feel very comfortable doing things, working with. So I wanted to come back with a gesture of the kind of gesture I was doing when I just started to work as an artist. So meaning back in 2005, 6, 7 in Paris when I moved to Paris. I did a lot of performances in public space and actions because I didn't have no practice as a former. I came from design and cinema. I work in the production company. I was actually doing advertising, and I was assistant director of a big company in Colombia. And we were doing like advertising of. I was young, but I have to a lot of responsibility at the time. I was 22, 23, doing Kellogg's, like Mastercard kind of commercials. I learned a lot about cinema in there, and then a lot about work, teamwork and stuff. Um, and so I wanted to kind of, because this show was also up, it's the show plays with some works were from 2010, 11, some works from 2025. It plays with temporality. And I think something that actually was actually very happy to experience is sometimes when you do a gallery show, you tend or you want to present the most fresh pieces that still smell. And you can still smell the oil painting, the trementin. But I think it's also like monuments. It's also arbitrary. It was like, why? We don't need to. I mean, it is good to have a conversation among words. So that was what I wanted to do. And this piece is a kind of a tricky piece. It's a glitch in a way. It's a piece that looks that is like an old piece, but it's actually the most recent one. And basically, what I did is I went out in the block of the gallery to restore some cracks on the pavement with a bunch of small bag of concrete that I colored with pigment. So it's a bit just joyful, more happier than the gray. And then I just wrote on it dignity and respect, and in Spanish, dignidad y respeto. I think I was very impacted by the stories of some friends or people I know in New York that, who are like undocumented and experience a lot of stress in these days, where like all the political kind of sphere is kind of pointing them as threat or like trying to chase them. So I imagine like it could be an expanded piece that could grow or around the city in this with this kind of humble and discreet kind of level. Also, I think it's a good um, contra gesture with dinosaur, which is this gigantic, super complex production to go just back in the street and do a simple gesture. And do it's also a little bit of a cake. When you mix the concrete and you put the color, it has to take you use the same care of when
Yeah.
you
I don't know if I ever want to make a birthday cake that you bake.
but for sure it's gonna be colorful, at
For
least.
sure, it'll be colorful. No, and it's such a, and I see Chloe popping back on also. We're kind of nearing the end of our time.
Mhm.
But it's such a generous gesture in so many ways. Color alone is generous. The idea that you're mending the sidewalk of the city that's always falling apart, and dignity and respect for all of the reasons that you're naming. I want to ask you what's next, and maybe Chloe, we can go back to the Pigeon Fest slide. And I'd love to hear about this event and some of
Mm.
the other exhibitions you have coming up. But first, selfishly, I have one more question, which is what do you feel? Do you feel like there's something in particular that you've learned about the public realm? You know, I've been working in this thing that's called public art for many years now, and the more that you work in it and the more that you think, especially with artists, about what the public realm means, what public art is, the more it kind of dissolves in your hands, right? It's
Yeah.
presenting sculptures outside, it's things that are funded by the government, it's publicly owned space, it's parks, it's all of us who are out there every day. And those definitions shift constantly depending on the work and depending what's happening on a single day. But is there maybe one, golden nugget of wisdom or humor or a joke that you
Mhm.
would want to share with us about something that's transformed
Yeah.
for you over the years?
I think, well, two things. I think the richness and then the thing I really feel excited about is like street is a space of of confrontation possibility also. You can never imagine what is going to happen once you go you close that door and you go out.
Mhm.
Because it's completely unknown, and that's something that I really like and then sometimes when I work inside museums, it's a more controlled sphere. I feel it's more like an academic kind of um, exercise. I'm talking to the experts, to people who are already into this or maybe discovered this because they're curious about the street is just wild. Um, and then I think also the street is kind of, or like public space is also a book. I think you can read it while you walk, and then you read so much things in a single, like some in just a single street. You make a tour of your block, and you have so many stories to tell. So many stories, not only about the people you see, but the stories of you can read in two walks here around. I'm in Prague. I happen to be in Prague now, but you can read like the conflict in between Catholics and like Protestants and Orthodox, and the same thing. You go for a walk in New York and you feel the confrontation in between people with a lot of money, people with no money at all, people with power, powerless, like racial wise, gender wise, and I think that's endlessly magic, and then kind of uh, and somehow I feel. Uh, Kind of, I don't know. I remember when I arrived to Paris, I didn't know anybody in Paris. I moved there just because I somehow had the feeling that it was a good school to go. I tried to go to school, learn French. I didn't speak any French at all. I didn't have any friends or family or relatives at all. So I was really alone, but I was very happy to be alone because somehow I felt like, oh, I can invite myself. Nobody know about me, nobody know me, so I just kind of make a new Ivan. Um, and then I remember having this in mind. Is like I'm alone with 10 million people. Like I've been accompanied, like I've been, which is like together, to get like to alone together in a way. But it was not a sad feeling. I was having the time of my life at the time. I get remember. So I guess I'm fascinated by it, and then also from a more critical and political perspective, it's a very marked political space, and I think we haven't been enough, let's say, insistent. Let's say I would say in the arts, because we let this space be dominated by power, money, and politicians, and then who are mostly facing giving shaping these cities. And I think people from the culture, not us artists, but all from other areas, should be more involved also in those things, those decisions, how we conceive the city, how we conceive togetherness, live together. So I don't have
I
maybe
couldn't
the
end a
golden
better
nuggets.
place to stop.
A lot of feelings.
Thank you. Thank you so
No,
much,
thank you.
Ivan. I think we might want to jump to questions soon, but first, do you want to do a little shout out for Pigeon Fest? And we have
Yeah, just New Yorkers. So you cannot miss this thing. We it happens. I imagine everybody knows about this, but there is a national holiday for pigeons in the United States. It's of course on June 13th. It celebrates actually. It's called Pigeon Appreciation Day, and it celebrates actually it was made after the Second World War and celebrates the pigeons who served in war and actually saved many lives by the messenger carriers. So this holiday has existed for now several years, and it's very becoming more and more popular in the United States. So that's why we decided to create a festival that's called Pigeon Fest, and we're gonna make a stage. There's gonna be concerts of amazing artists. June 14th. Actually, June 13th happens to be a Friday, so we move it to the Saturday, so make also more easy to families to come. There's gonna be games. There is about 20 different institutions who are involved: New York Public Library, Cornell. There's gonna be like a laboratory, like the ornithology department of Cornell. Is going to be kind of a celebration of wildlife in the city. And then dinosaur has to do with that. It's like, what if we make a monument not about us human, but about other species that live with us? So that's we're going to celebrate, and it's going to be fun. There's going to be a pigeon impersonation pageant contest, which is going to be like feathery and funk. There's of course there are going to be some serious talks about public art and about like horticulture and wildlife in the city, and then games, like fair games that we design also specifically for Pigeon Fest. And yeah, so it's gonna be like, I think it's gonna be one of these things. Like I was there when Pigeon Fest happened in New York, so like don't miss it.
like Woodstock.
Exactly, yeah. Woodstock had a beard, you remember? In the poster of Woodstock, he was always a beard, a little kind of pigeon though. So he was always there. And then, well, show wise is I open in 2 weeks. I opened a big show here in Prague named Radical Tenderness. I think you understand why. And then I have other shows to come at Gallery Vermelho in Sao Paulo and Dallas Contemporary in the fall. And yeah, for
So
now.
stay tuned. Ivan, thank you so much.
No, thank
Chloe,
you.
did you want to open up to questions?
Yeah, shall we do that first and then we'll play the video at the end?
Ah,
What do you
Which,
think, Ivan?
yeah, we have a surprise for the end. So
So stay tuned, stick around.
stay tuned. Yeah.
so we
No,
have
stick around. Stick around.
stick around. We have a few audience questions, and if you have a question, feel free to post it in the chat. I can't wait to go to Pigeon Fest. I hope to see you all there.
Yeah, I'm really worried about what I'm gonna dress. I mean, like what I'm gonna wear. I have to wear something special. I cannot be just like,
I know, for the contest.
I think an
yeah,
iridescent suit.
yeah.
We have some great questions for you, Ivan. The first question is from Julio. Julio asks, What do you see the future of memorials would be in, say, 100 years? Can you suggest common interventions people can create with problematic monuments?
Well, I think memorials, I mean, that's an amazing question. I don't know, but by just intuitively, I think we should also, I think monuments should be more alive. That's what I feel like personally. Like it's like I have to speak to me, Ivan. Um, I think it's sad and dusty um, and too arbitrarian to pretend that we're gonna have the monuments we have forever. It's also naive. Uh, so why don't allow ourselves to transform them, move them in out, to create dialogues, to create like conflict, to create. So I think memorials are also, they're present in like in the history of humanity everywhere, and then somehow monumentality or this idea that an object can remind us of something in the past that is important to it is there, it is there. So I'm not at all against it. I think on the contrary, I'm for just using a more other strategies that are not only those kind of representations and those kind of like linear kind of ideas, but maybe a more complex. I think life is complex. You got a shitty day, or but you could be you have a happy life, but you can maybe kind of have a shitty day one day, or the contrary, or both at the same time. So it's not, we don't live like on a like a timeline that is just unidirectional. It's really goes everywhere. So I think they had to somehow represent that, I feel.
Thank you for that question, Julio. And thank you
Thank
for
you,
that,
Julio.
Ivan. The next question, an audience member wants to know, they note that there's a lot of humor in your work and are curious if that was always the case or if there was a point in your work where you discovered the power of humor.
I was very sad before in the past. I had a very sad work at the early. No, no. I think it comes from either idiosyncratic thing in Colombia. I think no, it's not. Well, that's my view on it. Um, I feel in Colombia has a good humor is very present in daily life, in our daily life. We have a very violent history, recent violent history, and every family have experienced it, have experienced kidnappings, have experienced murders, and or like either by the conflict against guerrillas of the mafia, or also some violence inherent to like the inequalities of the country. So it's a tough country. It's a beautiful country. It's a tough country too, but it's also a joyful country, which is the contrasting thing. And then you kind of helps you to deal with humor. Even there is some historical figures in our country that were like comedians that made humor, that went into like the political kind of humor, and they got killed because their jokes were powerful enough to make politicians afraid. So I'm talking about like Jaime Garzón, for example. That's one of the most notorious examples. So I think humor has been part of the way also I kind of I have a relationship with life. It also passed through that, I guess. And so it's somehow I deal also with some, I guess, things with that. But I think also it's a powerful tool to actually, like that, for instance, that comedian, to point out those issues that are somehow impossible to say out loud in another sphere. But and then also to mock power. I think and if it's a kind of an old tale, but it's still the powerful people hate to be mocked. And then somehow it hurts their narcissistic kind of inner whatever spirit. So I think there's a bit of that and there. Also, I think more strategically, it's an invitation. I sometimes I touch issues that are difficult for some people, and I think humor or affection, also not only humor but other strategies, help to just put this subject on the table and then allow people ourselves to discuss it. So
Thank you for that answer. Thank you, audience member, for that question. Someone in the audience wants to know how you decided to name your Highline Plinth Commission dinosaur.
How?
Why?
So why? Yeah. Well, pigeons are dinosaurs. I like all birds are dinosaurs. Um, and so there were like, let's say, remained of that. It comes from different directions. It comes from like, let's say, from art historian perspective. There's always been like I think about like change of scales in art, and there is a long history of that. So I wanted just to find a strategy that have some logic and just not just scale up something just because. So I found the logic in between this pigeon and the Tyrannosaurus Rex being kind of very fit together, and then Tyrannosaurus Rex being like kind of a pop icon since the 90s, like in says before, but somehow also this idea of, or before, you know, this Godzilla breaking, destroying the city, or like Tyrannosaurus Rex, like in Jurassic Park. So this kind of iconography of dinosaurs that somehow it's been very into our culture and media, and so it kind of fits together. It's like dinosaurs and pigeons are dinosaurs, and then like, what's the most famous dinosaur? So it's Tyrannosaurus Rex, and somehow also they represent this power and like strength, and so the kind of the logic kind of function there, and and uh and then yes, there was another thing about extinction that like kind of was attractive to me, imagining that the dinosaurs were extinct and somehow now they have a monument. Somehow make me feel, or made me think about our own extinction, and then we're gonna be probably be extinct in some point, and so I somehow like imagine, I like to imagine someone in the distant future who is gonna make probably a monument about a human, and when humans will be extinct, and there's so like the remains of human will be like the visions of the other species that would be like powerful and dominant and build things.
I think that question is going to conclude our Q&A. I want to thank you, Iván and Melanie, for this really, really wonderful conversation. And while I prepared to share the video, I want to give you a chance, Iván, to tell us what we're about to see.
So we're about to see a video I made in 2009. So I arrived to Paris 2006, and then those 3 first years I was actually an art school, and I was actually somehow the street became like my theater, my tool, and being also a migrant was kind of alone in the city become also like a tool of creativity in a way. And then also this idea, what I say about like the boundaries we create among each other, ourselves, I was kind of trying to challenge that and go confront the people in the streets, in the subways, in the buses, and create kind of strange situations where we try to collaborate or meet, or I try to also create like kind of some surrealist kind of situations. So this is part of that, and it has to do a lot with the way I work, I guess, until today.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. En fait, aujourd'hui c'est mon anniversaire. Je suis tout nouveau à Paris, donc j'ai pas beaucoup d'amis. J'aimerais que vous chantez pour moi le joyeux anniversaire pour garder un beau souvenir. Est-ce que c'est possible?
Non, oui.
Ah, s'il vous plaît, s'il vous plaît. Alors, je vais juste enregistrer. C'est quoi votre nom? 1, 2.
Votre prénom? Allez, le prénom.
Ivan.
Ivan.
Ok. Alors, 1, 2, 3. Joyeux anniversaire,
Ivan. Joyeux anniversaire, Ivan. Joyeux anniversaire, Ivan. Joyeux anniversaire.
Bravo, merci. Merci beaucoup. Voilà. Voilà, merci. 25. Merci, hein. À bientôt.
It can be tender.
Wow, that was such a great way to end. Thank you so much, Iván. Thank you,
No,
Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Chloe. Thank you, Yvonne. To close, I almost just want to say happy birthday to everyone whenever your birthday is.
Happy birthday to
thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, happy birthday to everyone. Yeah, who cares today?
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Cecile at Yvonne's studio, who was so helpful in preparing for today. Thank you to Caitlin and Melissa at Perrotin, who are also very helpful. Thank you to the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our new social environment program and making conversations like this one possible, and for supporting our archive. And just thank you one more time again to everyone here today. And now, as is a real tradition, I'm going to throw open the microphones so that you all can say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for being here today, and we hope to see you again soon.